90.3 WHPC now presents Law You Should Know. The law affects every aspect of our lives, our home, our jobs, and our recreational activities. Now, learn about the law and how to protect yourself against the loss of your liberty or property, and learn how to stand up for your rights and seek compensation when you have been wronged. Your host for Law You Should Know is attorney Kenneth J. Landau, a past dean of the Nassau Academy of Law, and frequently lectures to lawyers on ethics and avoiding problems with clients, and to the public on how to choose and use lawyers. This is Law You Should Know on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC.
Hi, this is Ken Landau, and welcome to Law You Should Know. We're going to be talking today about more success with less stress concerning legal matters. Our special guest is Dr. Gary Sprouse. He's a retired primary care doctor who has written a book, Highway to Your Happy Place, which talks about how to live with less stress. And being a lawyer and being involved in litigation for all legal matters for clients is very stressful. So he's going to give us ideas on how we can reduce the stress and achieve more success. Gary, welcome to Law You Should Know.
Ken, thanks for having me on. I'm looking forward to helping your audience out.
And tell us, to open our conversation, about why you wrote this particular book.
So as a doctor, I saw a lot of stressed out patients that came in with high blood pressure and diabetes. And so I was like, we got to do something different, because I didn't want to just medicate them. And so I found a new insight into what was causing the stress, and that's what led me to writing a book, so I could give that message instead of just to my patients, that I could give it to a wider audience.
And what are some of the reasons why law can be so stressful to attorneys, especially if they're involved in litigation, in high-stakes matters? David versus Goliath. Go ahead.
I was just looking up some statistics, and what they talked about was like 50% of lawyers meet clinical depression symptoms. Like 30% of them are overusing alcohol or other stimulants. And what they talked about was that it's a heavy workload. They got to build up a client. And they also talked about some ethical issues. And I think that's part of what you do. And there's this ethics of like, you have to work for your client, but sometimes that puts you in an awkward position. That like it puts you in conflict with your own ethics. So.
Well, sometimes your employer wants you to bill a lot of hours, and so you're under pressure from your employer to bill a lot. You're under pressure from your clients to win, and that's not always possible. And the more you try to win when it's very hard, and the more you try to bill when you can only bill so much, it's the worst of both worlds.
Yes, absolutely. So it's like, yeah. Here's one of the statistics that I found that was shocking. 1 in 9 lawyers has had suicidal ideation, suicidal thoughts. And I was like, wow, that's a lot. I mean, that's like 15, I don't know, it's like 15% or something. That's a lot of stress, right?
And the legal profession is recognizing that. Bar associations have many support groups for depression or alcoholic abuse or drug abuse or other things, provide free counseling, support groups to lawyers, because they want to fight those effects and try to help support lawyers. And lawyers are also under pressure from clients to try to win. And sometimes, with lawyers that are going at each other in court or in litigation, and it's, it gets stressed on both parties, because sometimes when you win a case, there's a winner and a loser. And it creates adverse impact for the loser. Maybe the client's going to jail. Maybe they don't get compensation. Maybe they have to pay a large amount of damages. And so lawyers also are looking to alternatives to litigation, perhaps negotiating case, going to mediation, so that there are better outcomes for the clients on both sides and more options the lawyers can offer clients.
So here's what I was going to say is that all that is correct, right? I mean, the pressure to win is tremendous, because sometimes the consequences are bad. But here's the problem. The court system is pretty slow. And so what happens is that idea of, am I going to win or lose? You might not know for months or years. And so worry, and that's one of the things that I talk about, worry becomes a major problem, because you're sitting there going, I could end up in jail or with a multi-$1,000 fine, but you don't know. which is why they end up on TV shows all the time, because at the end of the episode, you don't know who's going to win or lose, depending on the jury, depending on the judge, depending on the mood, depending on the public opinion. So there's a whole lot of variables that go in that you don't necessarily have control over. And so you worry because you look into the future and you start focusing on all the bad things that can happen. And then you have that reaction, the fear reaction right now. And because the case might take months or years to come to fruition before you know what's going to happen, you have months or years to worry. And that can take a physical toll on people.
And you have, so as you said, there are months and years of delay and uncertainty. Much of it is not under control of your attorneys because the legal system just moves slowly. And just as we've seen in trial scheduling, some judges do manage their caseload, manage the lawyers, manage the litigants and the scope of the litigation. Other courts just let the cases move along themselves, let the clients and lawyers battle each other, and don't really manage and de-stress and move the cases along. And sometimes the lawyers and parties have no control over that. And control is the magic word. And sometimes the parties can engage in negotiations, sometimes with the help of the court, because that's something they may have control over, and they can mitigate the potentially bad outcomes. Sometimes they agree to alternate dispute resolution and can even agree to highs and lows so that they have some control over the litigation and manage a possible loss while guaranteeing a potential win. And that's becoming more involved with lawyers, especially with the better lawyers, because you don't know what's going to happen. It's a roll of the dice. And as you said, it can take delays. It can create uncertainty. And this way parties can move on, get some resolution, get some compensation. Yes.
I just read a book on mediation, and it's like, I think every human should read that book, because I think sometimes we get into these polar positions and brag about not being mediating. I'm like, no, we should all be in that situation where we're all looking for an outcome that fits everybody's desires.
Even if we're not looking for it, that's what we need. Sometimes we want that Rambo attorney, so it can be a David versus Goliath. And even people like yourself, people who are just mediation minded, it could be a social worker or a business person, or even lawyers get into mediation because there you're doing positive things. And even the courts are using mediation. They're slow to adopt and they're slow to go through the process, but you're helping to get people to a better place where they control the proceedings, where they have to sign off on the outcome, and they manage their risk. And those are all good things, and those are things the court will not do for you.
Yeah. Well, so in my book, what I talk about is worry. And what I found with my patients, when I would say to them, tell me what worry is. And they would go, oh, I know that one. I know what it feels like. I know how to use it in a sentence. When I use the word worry, people know what I'm talking about. And I said, okay, well, define it. And then they start stumbling. And what I realized is people don't have a real good definition. I was just at a conference today, and I'm talking to a psychologist, and they're struggling to give me a definition. So what I found was, if you're worried, but you don't really know what it is, well, how are you going to fix that? So I came up with this concrete definition. Here's the definition. I'm using my amazing skill of being able to envision the future, but I'm focusing on the bad outcome, which then makes me feel bad right now. And it gives me this fear reaction, and it makes my heart jump up and my blood pressure go up and my hair fall out. And it makes me want to go get a drink of alcohol or do something else to try and reduce that stress. And when you're waiting for months and years for the final verdict to come out, you can worry months and years, and it doesn't help you at all because it doesn't make a difference in the case. And so what I try to do in the book is say, like, some people will say, well, just live for today. And you're like, well, first off, that's impossible because you're looking into the future to figure out what's going to happen with this case. So what I talk about are two other things. I say, no, look, I want to keep your skill of envisioning the future, but I want to get rid of the side effect of worry. But you can't get rid of worry completely, because then you end up with these rose-colored glasses, and that's just as dysfunctional, right? So the term I use is realistic optimism. And so humans have the ability to choose. And what I say is, look, you can choose to focus on the bad things, or you can focus on the good things. So if you're a lawyer or a client and you're going, okay, I'm looking at a $10,000 fine. So you can focus on, I'm going to lose and I'm going to have to come with $10,000, which makes you feel bad now. And that could go on for a year or two. Or you can focus on the idea that I'm going to win and I'm not going to have to pay $10,000, which makes you feel good right now. So if I focus on, hey, I'm going to win, that makes you feel better. But here's the real, so it's realistic optimism. So I have to say, well, it's possible that I won't win, but I can plan for that, but I don't have to plan for it with fear. And that's the difference. That leads to the second tool, which is what I call a worry organizer. And what you do there is you write something down, and here's the writing. You organize it into, why am I worried? What am I worried about? Why am I worried? How likely is it to happen? And that's where your lawyer can come in and say, the chances of you winning or losing this case is 75%, 25%, 50%, whatever. And then you go, well, how dangerous is it if I do lose? And then you can do, the next two columns are, well, what can I do to prevent that from happening? And the last column is like, what if I lose? What am I going to do? Right? When you write all that out, then it's done. And you don't have to go over your head again and again and again and wake up in the middle of the night in a sweat and again and and now it's written down. So your friends, your family, your lawyer can look at it and say, hey, you forgot to add this, or maybe that's no, that's not the right statistics, right? And so now you have this objective measure of what it is you're worried about, how to fix it, and what to do in case it does happen. And so now you can focus on, hey, this is going to be a good thing because I hired a good lawyer, I didn't do anything wrong, blah, blah, blah. You can feel good about it now. And now waiting a year, not that big a deal, right?
And I'm glad you brought that all out. I'm going to comment on that in a second, but I want to remind our audience, you're listening to Law You Should Know here on WHPC 90.3, the voice of Nassau Community College in Garden City, New York. We're talking with Dr. Gary Sprouse, and he's talking about managing your stress to achieve more success in legal matters and litigation. And he's a retired primary care doctor, and he's written a book, Highway to Your Happy Place, because he realizes that stress in legal matters and stress about everything is the root of all evils, and it causes unnecessary stress and other medical problems. If you missed any portion of the show or you want to tell someone else about it, just go to the podcast at nccradio.org. So, Gary, I do want to mention that, again, through mediation, through settlement negotiations, clients and litigants and attorneys can take some control over the course of, let's say, the litigation or the criminal matter or the potential fine, as you mentioned, and try to resolve it earlier than later and try to achieve a slightly better result. Take a discount on the potential damages or take a discount on the potential recovery just to get it done. And with a lawyer who thinks that way, and especially if there's lawyers on both sides who try to resolve it, because it's causing stress and uncertainty on both sides in a divorce, in a business dispute, in an estate dispute. Sometimes people can walk away and, a half glass or a glass 3/4 filled is better than a half glass or no glass. So they can, reach a meeting of the minds.
Okay.
And this is what, it kind of is with that theory that what you would do if you could not fail. So if with negotiations, especially with parameters, if you have a minimum and a maximum recovery, it protects both sides, even if you go to trial, even if you go to arbitration. So you're giving up some recovery for reducing your potential exposure. And many big companies do this in big disputes and even in smaller disputes because it reduces the stress, creates more certainty in any kind of dispute.
Yeah, well, I've personally been involved in a couple of malpractice suits, and that's exactly what happened. Somebody, they're suing for $500,000 and it gets settled for $100,000. And it's like, I don't particularly like it, but they're doing what you just said. So.
And the people on the other side may not be happy either, but it's a long road and a very uncertain road. Right? Yep. And sometimes it's better to just let everyone move on with their life, depending on what the stakes are and what the real injuries are. But usually it's better to make peace with the situation and move on with your life because anxiety, as you mentioned, worry, fear, bitterness just eat away at you. It may eat away at the other person, but it doesn't allow you to move on. And you need a lawyer who's like-minded to help these scenarios work for you.
Yes. Well, so the other thing that I find in humans is we have a mind that can handle a number of different problems at the same time. But what happens is when you get too many problems and you get overwhelmed and you get past your ability to cope with things. And when people feel overwhelmed, that's a very scary place.
So what can you do about that? Can you outsource some of the problems? Can you put some of them on hold because they're not hurting you at the moment?
Well, the first thing I talk about is called lumping. And here's what I see people do. I got this legal problem, and then my son's this, and my wife's that, and my boss is this thing, and my next door neighbor, and oh yeah, and then I forgot my tire went flat, and they just keep lumping all these different problems, and they just look for things to put on top of it. I'm not sure why they keep doing that, but when people are feeling overwhelmed, they just keep adding more things, and you're like, whoa, okay. So the antidote to, and I call it lumping. I go, people get overwhelmed when they lump. And they put all their problems together, and because when they're putting together, it just becomes this big mass of black stuff, and you're like, I don't even know where to start.
It's overwhelming you and taking its physical and psychological toll.
Yes, so feeling overwhelmed becomes one more problem they throw on top. So the antidote is what I call compartmentalization, so that the more I keep these problems separate, because no one of these problems tends to be overwhelming. Like if I just look at my son, I'm like, well, whatever. If I look at my boss, if I look at my legal issue, blah, blah, no one of these is overwhelming. It's only when I let them all get together. So I will find myself going, oh my God, to my wife, Terry, look, I got this and this and that. I'm like, whoa, stop. I'm lumping, right? Let me keep these separate. So one of the analogies that I use for people, and I got this from my friend Melissa, I call it the shoebox idea, right? So if I walk into my bedroom and there's 100 shoe boxes and the lid's over here and the box is over there and the paper's here and the left is here and the right's there and there's 200 shoes and 100 boxes all over the place, you go, wow, what? That's crazy overwhelming. But if I walk in the room and all the boxes are neat and there's a box and the lid and the paper's inside and the 2 shoes in there and they're all put up against the wall, it's the same amount of shoes, but now it's not overwhelming. And now I just take down one box at a time, look at it, and put it back up. Take another box down, look at it, put it back up. And guess what? Now I'm not overwhelmed. Now I have more energy to take care of whatever these one problems are. So
at the same time, do some of those problems, you can outsource them, you can put them on the back burner, deal what's more urgent or what's something easier to start with?
Yes. So, yes, exactly. So I find that some people have problems. Like if one of your problems is when I go to work, I have to go through traffic. Well, you can't fix that. I mean, that's just going to be, right? So that's one you just, you know what? I'm going to put that in the closet and not even pay attention to that because there's nothing I can do about that one. But, my next door neighbor who, is making too much noise at night, well, I can do something about that. So let me do that. And you're right. What you need to do sometimes is make a list of your problems. And I tend to like to tell people, write stuff down. Here's what my friend says. The palest ink is better than the best memory.
And sometimes you can talk to someone, a friend, a coworker, someone like yourself, to sort out the problems and what you're thinking of postural solutions and brainstorm. You never know what may come up.
So when you write it out, then you can show your friend and go, here's what I'm thinking. Can you add something to this? Do you have another insight that I haven't thought of? Do you have a solution that I haven't considered? And it's like, yeah, when you do that, now they don't have to read what's in your mind because it's written down on a piece of paper. And so they can be much more effective in helping you out.
And do you also feel better getting it off your chest, putting it on paper, sorting them out a little bit, deciding one thing to tackle that you feel you can take care of maybe quickly or it's very important to you?
Yes, when you write it out, then you can start making a list and prioritize. And you can go 1, 2, 3, 5. You can, it keeps them separate, so you only got one problem at a time. It keeps you from having to use half your brain to remember the problems that you're supposed to be working on. So you can use all of your brain to try and solve the problem.
Is it also good to ask for help, ask a friend, a coworker, a counselor for some help in resolving them?
Well, I was looking up this articles on lawyers, and one of the things that it said, and I find this with doctors too, is they don't want to ask for help. They want to be like, I can do this. I'm smart. I can take care of this on my own. And a lot of times it's so much easier just to ask for help. And it's one of the things I find that problem more with men than women. Women tend to vent. They tend to like talk to their friends about it, and that helps them by talking about it, reduces their stress. But men tend to be minimizers. And so they go, well, it's not that big a deal. And so they minimize it until it gets overwhelming, and then they can't minimize it anymore. And then they freak out because like they've been minimizing. So they're looking at a 1, and all of a sudden they realize, oh, that 1's really a 10. And that like, whoo, yeah. That,
so if
like,
you're a friend of that man, and is it better if you see something to say something? Should you say, you seem to be a little bit stressed or overwhelmed? Can I help you with anything? Or maybe you can ask so-and-so to take some work off your plate or take a day off. Is it good to speak out?
Yes, it's willing. I mean, you have to be willing to ask, but here's what I say to people. And I had to learn this as a doctor, right? Like, people pay me for my advice, but that doesn't mean they're going to take my advice. And so in the beginning, I used to get upset. I would say, do this for you to reduce, lose some weight, say your diabetes will be better. And they'd come back and they'd gain weight, right? And at first you would get upset. You're like, wait, why didn't you listen to what I said? And it's like, no, my goal is to be your advisor. I'm here to give you advice on how you can be healthy. You get to decide whether you do it or not. And so as a friend, I would say, hey, I see that you're under some stresses, and I have some solutions that might help you if you're willing to listen. If you want to hear it, I'll let you know. If you want to not hear it, or if you want to hear it and not take it into consideration, I'm not going to get mad at you. I'm just going to say, hey, could I get this information to you in a better way that you could hear it? Is there, so you just have to give the advice, but not be.
Could you also volunteer to work with them? Could you say, I'll split that dessert, so we'll split the joy, the pleasure, and the pain, or we'll take a little hike to help, do a good thing for our bodies?
Yeah, I was at a meeting the other day, and it was a study group, and one of the people that were in the group was clearly really stressed out. And I came up to him and said, look, I see you're really stressed out. I just wrote this book, Highway to Your Happy Place, to help people with stress. Would you be willing to let me help you? And he was like, oh, yeah, I would like that. And so, then that started a relationship that I can now give him some advice. And then I have to be careful not to go, you didn't listen to me, right? Because getting angry at them doesn't make sense. Because you're right. Sometimes just talking to people helps a lot.
And lets them vent, and might help give them a starting point to work on their challenges. I just want to mention we're talking with Dr. Gary Sprouse. He's the author of Highway to Your Happy Place, and you're listening to Law You Should Know. And we're talking about how lawyers can reduce their stress, and their clients can reduce their stress and achieve greater success. If you missed any portion of the program, the podcast is at nccradio.org, and you're listening to Law You Should Know on 90.3 WHPC Radio, the voice of Nassau Community College in Garden City, New York. Dr. Sprouse, what else do you cover in your book?
So I talk about guilt and regret, and I find that those are pretty big topics. They're similar, but they're different. And sometimes people lump them together, and it's like, no, these are very different things. So the similarities are that they're both related to things that happened in the past. The difference is, guilt is, I did something wrong. I broke a rule. I broke a law. And it might be an unwritten rule. It might be, hey, I wore white after, Labor Day or something, right? I mean, it doesn't always have to be a written law. But it's, I did something wrong. And guilt is society's way of hurting people to get them to live together, right? So we don't like when people don't feel guilty about doing something wrong. Like that's when you see somebody who's, killed their child and they go, whatever, like, that's not good at all. If they're sitting in the courtroom crying and sobbing, I can't believe I did that, right? We go, okay, well, they realized they shouldn't have done that, so good, all right? Regret is very different. So regret is, you made a choice that led to a bad outcome. So guilt is I did something wrong. Regret is I made a bad choice. Very different.
And I just want to say, sometimes lawyers regret they didn't take more time off for things they enjoy to spend time with their family. So they should, in their younger self, and employers and colleagues should encourage them and allow them to take time off for those life events to balance out their work life with things they enjoy, because in the end, they'll have a better relationships with their family, friends, and coworkers, and there'll be less guilt and less regret down the road.
Yeah, and that's important. So like I do a seminar, and the women will invariably, I go, okay, write down something you feel guilty about. And the women are all writing furiously, and the men are like looking around going, oh, I don't know. But most of the women would go, I feel guilty that I didn't do enough for my kids. And really, it's not guilt. They didn't do anything wrong. It's a regret. They wish that they had made different choices, that they had spent more time with the kids and less time at work or whatever. And so to fix regret, what you have to do is go, well, it's in the past. I can't change it. All I can change is the future. And I can change my decision-making process. That's something I can do. And if you do that, then that should reduce your regret.
Okay, and where is your book? Can you give us your website for more information about the work you do?
The website it's called thelessstressdoc.com.
And what other information can people find there?
Yeah, if they want to get in touch with me personally, my email is lessstressdoc@gmail.com.
And what other tips you have for do's and don'ts for lawyers and clients in achieving a less stressed life?
So one of the other things I talk about is boredom, which, it's an interesting process, right? So some people get bored very easily. Other people don't ever get bored. The other thing I talk about is, and this is actually really important. When I say to people, like, if you had less stress, where would you be? And they go, I don't know. I never really got that far. I only thought about having less stress. So that got me. That's why the book's called The Happy Place, is because what I realized is what we were really trying to do with our less stress is be able to spend more time in our happy place. But if you don't know what that is, how are you going to find it? So one of the things that I do in the book is define the happy place, to tell people what it is so they can know where it is.
And the bottom line is to try out different things until you find something that makes you a little happy. But take time out to explore. Well,
there's ingredients to the happy place, and that's what I learned. Like, your happy place might be different than mine, but the ingredients are very similar. So I have contentment, I have pleasure, I can anticipate good things happening, I have gratitude, I have fulfillment. And there's a term I use called CASH, and it stands for connected, accepted, safe, and hope.
Okay.
And when you have all those things, that's a nice place to be.
Okay. I'd like to thank Gary Sprouse for being our guest on Law You Should Know here on 90.3 WHPC. If you missed any portion of the program or you want to tell someone else about it, just go to the podcast at nccradio.org. And please join us next week at this time for another program on Law You Should Know.